we start, I'm just going to introduce myself. I'm Jeremy Lindsey. I'm on the committee for the regional group, and I'm responsible for surveys and recording. I'm here in lieu of Phil Huggins, who would be chairing this meeting as our chair. Unfortunately, many of you all know that he was taken quite ill recently and spent some time in hospital. He's back home now and he seems to be recovering quite well at the moment. So he sends his apologies for today, and I think we all wish him well in his recovery, and hopefully he'll be back in time for the next annual general meeting, if not sooner. Okay, I'm just going to run through a few quick housekeeping points. The toilets are all in the car park, so you've probably seen the block as you came in and parked, and for those of you who've been to Wood Mills before, you probably know that as well. In terms of a fire alarm going off, or we have to evacuate the building, if you go out through the door that's open, turn left is the quickest way to the car park, and the mustering point is actually in the car park. We've got a list of everyone who's here, so we can then check that off. I'd just like to say that the meeting is actually being filmed and recorded, so if anyone's got any objections, keep well out of sight of the line of the camera. But I'm assuming we've got approval from everyone that we can record this, primarily to let people. There's been a number of people who can't attend who have actually requested that that they could have a record of the meeting in some form or another. Okay, so I was just going to really just start. I'm going to go through some apologies as well, just talking about that. We have got apologies from a number of people. From the people who are currently on the committee, we've got an apology from Phil Huggins, Paul Davey, unfortunately can't be here today, and Sean Palmer. Also, where Alan and Val aren't here, are they?
I don't think so.
No.
No.
Alan and Val Allison, Alexis Rogers from the Wildlife Trust, Kathy Wallace, Elizabeth Hunt, Jane and Michael Joseph, Jeannie Whitman Esdale, Fiona McConaughey, Michael Blenko, Peter Brown, Kim Huggins, and Sue and Mick Dennis are all offered their apologies for the meeting. I think that's about 13 people in all, isn't it? Okay. There are no previous minutes from a previous AGM because this is our first AGM. And I'm glad we've got a reasonable turnout today. It's good. I'm glad that we've all come and we're quorate, which is good. Which is an important part of it. I know that the chair's report and the accounts and the chair's report have been sent out as a summary to everyone previously, so that's been distributed. We're going to do a quick presentation going through the chair's report and the accounts, and Viv's going to do a bit of talk about some of the events that have taken place over the last year. After that, we're going to have the formal business of re-electing the committee and noting the adoption of a number of documents. Then there'll be a chance for any questions on matters arising from today and any other general business. I'll then close the formal meeting. I just wanted to check something first though, Viv, because one of the things I got on the agenda was the date of the next meeting. Are we going to fix a date today, or are we going to say that will be arranged within a committee meeting over the next few months? Yeah, to be decided, yeah. Okay. And assuming it'll be in a year's time. I'll then close the formal meeting. I'm going to move on to two talks from Tony Whitbread and James Duncan. I knew that all. I did know that all along, James. Okay, and they're going to give us a couple of quick talks. Tony's going to be talking about global to local, and James is going to be talking about Woods Mill and the history and the wildlife. Following that, there will be a guided walk through the nature reserve, and we're going to split you into two groups. And Tony's going to lead one group and James is going to lead the other group. James works currently with the Wildlife Trust as the Communities and Wildlife Officer, and obviously knows the reserve very well. Tony is currently president of the Wildlife Trust and equally knows the reserve very well indeed as well. So they should be illuminating whoever you get as your your walk leader. Okay, so I think without any further ado, I'm going to move on to the presentations around the Chair's report, and I'm going this on behalf of Phil, so bear with me because it's not my presentation in such. It is Phil's presentation and I am just doing it on his behalf. Okay, so that's the agenda for the day. Okay, so from the Chair's report, our first committee meeting was held in April 2021. So that really marked the start of the regional group, the Storrington and Arun Valley regional group of the Wildlife Trust. We had a formal launch meeting at the end of September, and that was the one in the church, wasn't it, in Storrington? Yeah, there was quite a good attendance from that. Can you remember how many people came to that?
60-ish.
60-ish, which was a really good meeting. We've had a busy first autumn. We've been raising the profile of the group at shows and through articles, Facebook web pages and advertising. And we've held a number of successful outdoor and indoor events, including Zoom meetings. And all of this was done obviously under the cloud of the ever-changing COVID-19 restrictions. And we were lucky to actually get some face-to-face meetings in there, and then it all closed down again and went back to Zoom. There have been a number of online events with talks, and we did I don't know anyone here took part in the butterfly quiz at all, which you may remember me from that because I was part of that. Okay, so that's where we got to by the end of the year, really. Early 2022, we took some time to formalise our group strategy, and there was a lot of work went on within the committee. Certain members of the committee, which were actually, I think Sue, you were part of that, and Viv and Phil really were the main three drivers of that. And we worked on, they worked on getting the three key documents that we're going to adopt later on in the thing: the Constitution, the group governance and guiding principles, and the group vision, values and purpose. And those two have been distributed, haven't they?
Yes, they've all been distributed.
Yeah, they were consulted on and then rewritten, updated, and are now in their final version. Alongside that, there was a process which was identifying and selecting some citizen science group projects to engage and educate members, looking to see whether they can get some practical benefits and tangible results for nature. Most of these have now been launched and are underway, and for those who are interested, the projects are: there's a gardens project which is split into three areas, which is pollinators, wildflower meadows and hedgehogs. There's a churchyard project which is part of a broader project which is run by the Wildlife Trust, and Christine has been heavily involved in that, coordinating the monitoring of wildlife in Storrington, Billingshurst and Pulborough. And I've seen some of the results of some of the stuff coming out of the Pulborough bird survey there, which looked really, really promising. There was some good stuff coming from that. There's a road verges project, which I know, Sue, you're involved in that, aren't you? Yeah. There's going to be a Swifts project, which I don't think is really quite started because Phil was going to be leading that, but we'll pick up on that. A trees project and an invasive species one, which Viv's been involved with. Alongside that, there's been an emphasis on our communication and collaboration with other groups within our part of the county, and there's, obviously things like Christine becoming involved with the churchyard groups, which are connected in. The group has also joined the South Downs Network and the South East Climate Alliance. So where are we now? We've still got much left to do. The priorities and projects will change. There's now over 200 named members of the regional group, which I think is pretty impressive actually within a year to have got to 200 people. And I think our aim is really to encourage people and greater membership participation in some of our activities and shaping of the group. Many people have offered their time and expertise and experience, and we're really grateful for that. We've articulated and documented group constitution, strategy and guiding principles. The projects are beginning, members participating, and they'll deliver results and continue to raise our profile for the benefit of nature and impact and visibility of the Sussex Wildlife Trust in our communities. There's a whole range of thanks really that we've got to do. I mean, the 200 members who have joined, we'd like to really thank them, because it's a validation of Phil's vision, I think, when he came up with the idea of actually starting a regional group. And it shows that there is a real interest from members of the Sussex Wildlife Trust in becoming actively involved in their local area. Phil certainly wanted to thank the committee and those of us who've been on those meetings, and I know some people have been really working very, very hard. Time's almost like a full-time job, I think people would probably say, wouldn't they? There's a lot of effort goes in there on the background. Yeah, you may see the presentations and things like that, but behind all of that, there's a lot of hard work that's gone into getting us to this point. There are a number of key individuals within our region, and in a way they're too many to mention. I don't want to identify particular people. There's been a support and encouragement from the Sussex Wildlife Trust, who have worked very closely with us, and it's been really helpful. There are local organisations who have offered us financial and other support, and we'll be looking into that again from the future, and be grateful for some of the. I mean, Sue might cover some of that when you do your treasurer's report as well, so you'll find out about that. So that's where we're at, really. We've come a long way in a year. It seems like it's really hard to believe that it was only April last year that we had our first committee meeting. And here we're now with our first annual general meeting. So I'm now going to hand over to Sue, who's going to do the Treasurer's report. And over to you.
Okay. Well, I wanted to...
Is that the first one? No, that's it there.
That's the first one.
That's it. Okay.
So everybody should have had a chance to have a look at the annual report and accounts. The Chair's report, obviously, Jerry's just covered, and the actual accounts themselves are my department. So I wanted to talk really about how we're managing financially, and the process that we've gone through since the start-up. First thing we needed, of course, when we started the group was a bank account, because if you want to apply for funding, you have to have a bank account to put it into. And to do that, we had to draft a constitution, which we duly did, and got that through the committee so that we could then open a bank account. In the early stages, we relied quite heavily on the generosity of our committee members, who not only gave their time, but actually some of them gave their own money to keep the group afloat while we were waiting for funding to come in. And we had to get various things off the ground. So we set up communications. We were very much helped by Sarah Bowditch, who's sadly no longer on the committee, but helped us enormously setting up MailChimp for us and a mailbox, and we have our own domain as well. All of these things cost money, and as I say, the committee generally chipped in to keep these things, so that we could do these things before we actually had any money of our own. Then we decided that we needed to print our first publication, which you've probably seen. It's a small leaflet. There's some over by the committee meeting display board over there. Obviously, that also had to be funded, and that was also funded by the generosity of our committee. So by August, we were up and running. We had a bank account just. And then we applied to the Storrington Parish Council, who were offering money to groups who were trying to recover from COVID. And they very kindly gave us £250 as a start-up grant, which, again, came in just the right moment, so that we actually then were up and running with some funding. In September and October, we had our two meetings, the launch meeting and then the Wilder Horsham meeting at Pulborough. We debated for some time about how much and if to charge for those meetings, but of course meetings like that do have quite a substantial cost. There's the hall hire, we had refreshments, and we needed to... Oh, there's somebody coming in. Welcome. we needed to fund PPE and stationery and all sorts of things. So we decided in the end that we would charge for entry. And in fact, at the end of the day, we managed to cover the costs of those 2 meetings by the attendance and a little bit of generosity from the committee in waiving their expenses. So we were then not out of pocket and looking forward to doing such things again. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide. So by December, we were really moving towards getting more funding for the projects that we wanted to undertake. Pulborough Parish Council then gave us £100 in a grant for which we have yet to allocate to a project, but we were looking at the time as for project funding. And then, amazingly, Waitrose gave us £500 from their community fund, and they've not told us that we have to spend it on anything specific, which is very good news, because obviously a group like this, there's not just the projects, and I'm quite confident over time that we will find funding for any project that we want to undertake, because but the Sussex Wildlife Trust will fund certain activities, and there's money out there for conservation work. But we need to fund our ongoing costs, or having a mailbox, having MailChimp. These things cost money every month. And so that the community grant from Waitrose will really stand us in good stead for some time to come. And obviously there have been other donations coming in from well-wishers, for which we are enormously thankful. So where are we now? We have sadly just tipped out under the £1,000 in the bank, but that's a very good position to be in. We have the money to do the projects that we want, or at least to start work on the projects. And as I say, I'm confident that we will be able to get funding if we need it. So we're in a very good position, I think, going forward. That's me.
Okay, thank you. I'm now going to hand over to Viv, who's going to give us a quick run through events with a much more exciting PowerPoint, actually.
There weren't any numbers on it, I hope you noticed.
Jerry, shall I?
Do you want to do
Shall I
it?
click through?
Yeah,
I think
take
it might
control.
just be.
Take control.
So yeah, I thought I would just change the tone. Got lots of colourful slides, so just energise us up for just having a slightly different aspect of this. So going through our achievements and what we've done in the last year, which is actually slightly less than a full 12 months. So what can I say? We certainly have been busy bees, right? On average, we've been doing two events every month. So that's quite a lot of kind of organisation and things to get geared up for. We've held a total of 16 events, slightly more indoors, and those were either on Zoom or physical indoor meetings. We kept a tally on how many people kind of register and turn up at our events, and was roughly sort of 260-ish in that sort of ballpark. Obviously includes the speakers, includes the committee, but nevertheless it's quite a lot of people that have kind of come and enjoyed things with us and learnt along with us. That's my busy bee interpretation, which I... Okay, so we have done, we kick-started off with the Storrington Street Party, which was, I've got here, end of August 2021. So that seems quite a long time ago. And we sold some second-hand books. We got a few pennies in from that. And we had we were a committee who didn't know each other, so it was an opportunity to just get to know each other as much as anything else. Then, some of you might know, this was the Amberley Eco Fair in the church, and that is Hugh Morgan on the left there from the Sussex Wildlife Trust, and myself were there with a stand. Then we did the Pulborough Harvest Fair, which I personally wasn't at, but some of you were. And another sort of community event which we held was the Storrington Volunteer Show of the Storrington Community Partnership. And in fact, we mentioned Sarah Bowditch, who was our communications and advertising person. She's right on the left there. Then on walks, the very first walk we did was led by Paul Davey. Some of you were there in October 2021, Peckham Harbour. Then I roped in my husband, as I often do, Tony Whitbread, and we went for a walk in Ebon Common. So a lovely ancient woods. And if you haven't been, seriously, you really must go. And there was Kathy on the left-hand side there. She was our secretary for a while with the kids, but again, people find themselves having just a bit too much work in a sense, and then leave our committee. So anyone who's interested, please let us know.
There are
Quick
vacancies.
plug whilst we're at it. Cold Waltham was a lovely morning, again led by Paul Davey, and then more recently we did the RSPB Pulborough Brooks, which we had 2 groups, Christine and Paul leading some of them. And in fact, in total on that particular walk, we had more than 60 bird species, which is always lovely to kind of know what you see, what you find. Our launch, as we said, end of September. That was a great event, and we got a bit greedy, and we actually rented out both of the rooms that were available in this particular Methodist church. We felt at the time, because of COVID restrictions, we wanted that sort of space to move in. So we had our display board, we had the South East Climate Alliance posters, we had exhibitions of all sorts, you might remember. We had 2 photo exhibitions by Jamie Fielding and Elizabeth Zesheen on the left-hand side there. We had an artist who exhibited her work, a local artist from Storrington, Gabby Carr, and again we sold some second-hand books, which essentially we just wanted to get rid of. Nature-related. Oh, I think, in all fairness, we had a fantastic kitchen team, and we had lovely refreshments, homemade cakes, etc. And that team is amazing. We had another physical event, which was the Wilder Horsham one, and that's a 5-year initiative where Horsham District are working in collaboration with the Sussex Wildlife Trust. This aims to build a whole nature recovery network system across the whole district. And we had the manager there, Helen Peacock, Richard Black and Chloe Harrison. So it was a really interesting, informative kind of evening. And again, I think people who were there, that's our audience, and we had a great time. Switching to online talks. Interestingly, we were banking with HSBC at the time, and they invited us to do a climate, a talk really on rewilding our local area and our local gardens. So there was about 50 of them online. It was quite exciting because it was all London-based people. So that was quite an opportunity, which was a little bit unusual for us. Jerry hosted probably the most successful event we've had so far, which was the Sussex the Biodiversity Records Centre with Claire Blenko giving us that talk. And we had over 100 subscriptions, which 100 was our cut-off. So we took over 100 subscriptions at that time for people to attend that meeting. And I think the other one we had was the photography session, which was beautiful photography from the wildlife of Costa Rica by one of our members who offered to give us this talk, George Reiki. Then, in the new year, stupid or not, but we decided in January to go and hunt for some brown hair streak eggs at the recommendation of Michael Blenko. So it was a cold, frosty morning, and we were looking for tiny white eggs on very whitish, frosted kind of stems. And I think the only reason we were successful is because we had Martin Callagher, who's our local Storrington butterfly expert, who had marked up those little stems with a piece of cotton. I think.
No,
oh, did you?
We did
Oh, well
some.
done. There we go. Good. It was great fun. Lots of us there, and quite frankly, after the sort of Christmas time, New Year, it was really a lovely event. Continuing the theme on butterflies, we had, as Jerry mentioned, this lovely quiz, which was great fun. Lots of organisation behind the scenes, but it really was quite good. And we had a speaker from the Sussex Butterfly Conservation, Bob Foreman. And as I say, Martin Callagher really helped us with all the questions and everything. That was good fun. And I think just to add here at this stage that any of these events, if you did miss them, some of them are recorded, so you can go back and have a look. So just let us know, and we can point you to the right link so that you can go and have a look and see and actually experience that as well. So finally, we've already said thanks to the parish councils for some money. Thanks also to individuals and Waitrose for extra money to be able to do all these things. But of course, from my personal point of view, it is really everybody's time. I mean, people, committee, as well as members, put in a lot of time for these sorts of things. And, you know, it is just absolutely invaluable. We can't do it without them. And of course, we also need an audience to come and enjoy it and share their experiences and everything with us. So that really is fundamental. I'd like to finish with a quote, which I think we all see from time to time in our Sussex Wildlife Trust magazine book. So, print's a bit small here, but I'm going to read that to you. And that's just the aims of the Sussex Wildlife Trust. It's to conserve the Sussex landscape, wildlife and its habitats, and to use its knowledge and expertise to help the people of Sussex to enjoy, understand and take action to this end. So I invite you all to enjoy, understand and come and take action with us in order to enjoy our Sussex landscape and make it a bit more wild. So hope you enjoyed those colourful slides.
Okay, thank you, Viv. That's really good. I'm just going to return. We've got some actual AGM business to actually conduct now. The first thing is the election of the committee, or the re-election of the committee. There are a number of people who have agreed that they will stand on the for the committee over the next year. There is no need for an election because of the fact that there are more committee places available than there are people who are standing. So I'm just going to read out the names for the formal record of the meeting. The following people who have agreed to remain on the committee for this year are Paul Davey, Viv Doussy, Sue Ewers, Julie Garman, Phil Huggins, Erica Jakins, Christine Lindsey and Jeremy Lindsey. That's right. Yeah, I've got everyone.
So.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So that's that bit done. That will be the committee. There are vacancies. We said if anyone wants to join, and I suggest you get in touch with Viv and have a chat. The next thing is just a note that we're formally adopting the following 3 documents. 4, is it, including the annual report? Yeah, and it was the annual report and accounts for the year end. They're going to be formally adopted, and the constitution, the group governance and guiding principles, and the group visions, values, and purpose. And those have already been distributed to members and people, and there are copies at the back if anyone. A fascinating reading for anyone who wants to take part. Before we go any further, I've just got any other general business. Just wondering if there are any questions from anyone in the audience about anything that they've seen or heard today, or any comments they want to make about that. I'm more than happy to take them now. Has anyone got any questions they want to ask at all? Any questions? No?
Good.
Okay, that's fine. We obviously did a good job there. And finally, I just wanted to say something about joining the projects. I meant to mention it earlier on, but we've been through the list of projects that are actually existing and going on. If anyone does want to become involved with them, I think probably to actually maybe talk to you, Viv, in the first place, and then you can direct them onto the appropriate lead person.
Yeah.
So if anyone is desperate to get involved with swifts or hedgehogs or gardens or road verges, please let us know. Okay. And finally, I just want to offer some thanks. First of all, I want to say thanks to Kyle because he's filming and recording this for us. For Sue McPherson for the food and the drinks. To the Wildlife Trust actually for the use of the room and the reserve so that we can have the walk. And James and Tony for leading the walk, and for everyone to come for coming. It's really good that people have actually come and turned up. We were worried at one point that we weren't going to have enough people here, and that we were going to be sitting in a room talking to ourselves. But it's always grateful to know, and it's like hearing things like 100 people coming to one talk about wildlife recording, which is, I think, is really impressive. And it was a good talk too. But it's really nice to feel that people are actually participating and becoming engaged in everything. Okay, so we're not going to fix the date for the next annual general meeting today. We'll do that within the committee and people will be informed about that in due course. I'm assuming it will be in May next year sometime. Okay, so on that note, I'm going to close the annual general meeting for this year, and I'm going to move on to the talks. And first of all, we're going to have Tony talking about global to local.
Great. Okay. Well, we're not going. I think James and I are not going to speak for that long because it's too nice outside. So we'll canter through something. And what I was asked to do, what I thought I'd talk about was kind of context. From global to local. I'm a bit of a one for context. I like to see how we fit into the bigger picture. So I thought I'd just look at, well, what's the global context that we're working within, and how does that work with us? And also, I think we should bolt the doors, because whenever you talk about global context, it starts very, very depressing. So I'll warn you, and I think we need to hear some of these hard messages first. But it does end on a high note, so don't run away or commit suicide halfway through. Right. So, where are we globally when it comes to some of our measures of wildlife? Well, I think we all know that it's not looking good, is it? This is the Worldwide Fund for Nature Global Living Planet Index. This was a study of 20,000 populations of vertebrates around the globe. And you can see the index there going down. Populations have reduced in the vertebrates around the world by 68% since 1970. Judging my audience carefully, I think some of us can possibly remember 1970. And that wasn't exactly an ecological high point, was it? So 1970. Some of us maybe can remember 1972, the first Stockholm conference, the first Earth Summit was actually in Stockholm. So we said we were going to fix it then, didn't we? So that was the point of having all the world's leaders getting together. And we did the same again in 1992 with the Rio de Janeiro Earth Summit. We signed the Convention on Biological Diversity. That will fix it, won't it? We'll turn it around by then. No, it didn't. You can see the decline continuing. Well, we'll do a plan then. So we did a plan in around 2020, and that was, again, the Convention on Biological Diversity. We're going to have targets. We're going to have plans. We're going to stop the loss of wildlife by 2010. Didn't happen. Can't see a slight dent in that graph. And in one of the more recent meetings in 2010, Aichi Aichi, I think it's pronounced, in Japan, again, harsh targets. How we're going to turn this around, and we're going to turn around the biodiversity loss, so we'll be redeeming all the lost biodiversity by 2020. Again, that didn't happen, did it? And you may know that the Conference of Parties, or the COPs, they started with the 1992 conference. You've probably heard about COPs when it comes to climate change. We had COP26 in Glasgow last year. There's also a biodiversity COP. We've had the 15th biodiversity COP this year. Again, we all got together, all the nations of the world got together. We're going to solve this biodiversity problem. As far as I can see, we said the same sort of thing over again. We're going to set ourselves some targets. We're going to do all this. Well, it hasn't worked very well so far. So we're seeing real declines over an extended period with no real evidence of anything being turned around. And just to make it real, it's these sorts of things, the vertebrate animals. Not necessarily these individual species, but we are losing populations of many, many species. So not only are we reducing species, there's an extinction rate which is probably at least 100, probably 1,000 times higher than the expected background, but we're actually losing populations of animals as well. If we kind of summarise this, we could say that we've probably lost, about half the vibrancy of nature in our lifetimes, which is a very bad record, isn't it? And look at just one specific here. Marine birds, because actually Britain is very important for seabirds. Populations of seabirds down 70% since 1970. So not looking good. This is a shocking statistic as well, and I present this quite often because it gives you a context for how we're sitting. If you look at the weight, the biomass of all the mammals, so this is mammals on Earth, look at the weight, the biomass of all the mammals on Earth, 96% of that weight is either humans or our livestock, and a couple of pets. Only 4% is everything else. I find that shocking. Only 4% are blue whales, elephants, mice, badgers. All the rest, 96%, is us and our livestock. Not much room for expansion there. You know, our whole society is based on the idea of exploitation and expanding into the natural world. Well, we're not going to be able to do that anymore because actually we've used up most of it. This is not just exotic creatures a long way away. Britain is one of the most nature-depleted countries in the world. I think we come about 189th out of 219, something like that. We're a long way down, so it's not just those people over there, it's very much us. Think about the turtle dove. a lot of us can probably remember when the sound of a purring turtle dove was actually quite a familiar sound of the countryside. It's now a real surprise to hear it. 98% decline. I think that's since 1990, not since 1970. Yeah.
I just read yesterday that Malta has just opened its shooting
Yeah.
season on,
Oh, yeah.
on these lovely little creatures.
Exactly. A lot of the loss is because of shooting, but an even bigger proportion of the loss is because of what happens in this country, the habitat loss. So it's a real shock. And your question is, how long before that just becomes a memory that we think about? One of these things that no longer occurs in this country. So there's direct loss here. Okay, so you could just look at that and think, well, okay, so that's the loss that we're having. But scientists increasingly look at this in terms of planetary boundaries that we must not cross. This is our life support system, that we need to have all of these in place in order for us, as an individual species, to survive. 9 planetary boundaries. We need to be in the green. You can see in many of these cases we're way outside the green, we're past the amber, and we're into the red. Just to look, giving some bit more detail here, novel entities, that basically means pollution, things like plastic and so on, way into the red there. If we look at biosphere integrity, the one there, that's biodiversity, that's wildlife, way into the red there. Climate change isn't even the worst, and yet we're way into the amber when it comes to climate change. Land use, the use of land to create all sorts of the things that we want, again, way into the red. We've affected the way we impact on landscape, the way we impact on wildlife and biodiversity also influences the way chemicals flow through that system. So, for example, biochemical flows have been massively impacted by our activities. There's only one that's doing well, and that's stratospheric ozone depletion. We've actually turned that around. That's the one good example. But this is something to worry about. We should be in the green. We're outside the amber in a lot of these things and way into the red with some. Now, that's only a temporary thing. Oh my God, the world is ending. You can come away from that and you can think, well, this is the end of the world. This is terrible. I look at this in a different way. The world's been through changes many, many times in the past. You could look at this in a different sort of way and say, actually, what we're seeing is something, the scene is set for disruptive change. These sorts of things, these sorts of continual curves upwards when it comes to exploitation and use, can't go on forever. We must think in terms of cycles and the way things change, the way things move on. So we're thinking about where we're at a point now when disruptive change is actually inevitable. Now that sounds like a bad thing, but disruptive change can be a good thing. As a silly example, it's not, it's a big example, but actually it's silly in terms of scale. This is the year 1900 in Fifth Avenue, New York, and you think, you look at that, the street completely full of horses, and you say, where's the car? And just about you can see there's one car there, a kind of chitty bang bang thing that only the rich could actually have. They'll never catch on, noisy smelly things that are unreliable, they'll never catch on. 13 years later, the same scene, where's the horse? The whole thing has completely turned around. This is what's meant by disruptive change. The invention of the automobile disrupted the whole society that was based on the horse. And it wasn't just a matter of changing transport, that effect rippled all the way through society, so society completely changed because of the way transport changed. That's actually a huge change in terms of the way transport changed and the way it affected settlement patterns and everything else. I say it's a huge change, but this actually is relatively trivial to the sort of disruptive change we might be expecting now. The point I say about disruptive change is it sounds bad. It sounds like, oh, it's the end of the world. What we do wrong with disruptive change is we try to hold on to the past. There are probably loads of people there saying, I'm not going to get rid of my horse, I like my horse, I'm going to keep that, I'm going to build my business around horses. They probably went bankrupt. The people who are going in the direction of disruptive change, setting up petrol stations, building cars, they're the ones that did well. So it's not a very good example because I don't think we really wanted to go that far down the road with cars, but it shows the point that actually if you're on the side of the disruption, then actually you get the positive change. And I think that's the way we need to think about where we are now. Disruptive change is coming. How many of you are going to go home and put your cassette into your cassette player and sit down and listen to your music, or are going to plug your Betamax into your VHS recorder and watch some videos? Things change, things move on, and what replaces them can be a lot better. So the point is about disruptive change. And this is the background, I think, to where the United Nations is at the moment. They've declared the 2020s as the decade on ecosystem restoration. Okay, so we said the same sort of thing before. That's those graphs I showed earlier. We have said the same sort of thing. But I think we're in a category difference, in a scale difference. What they're saying there, this is it's challenging everyone to massively upscale restoration efforts and breathe new life into degraded ecosystems. It's not just trying to degrade things slightly slower. It's not trying to stem the loss. It's no, okay, rebuild, regenerate. This is what it's all about. We're moving from an exploitative, destructive society to one that is regenerative and building. And that's the fundamental disruptive change that we're going to see. Moving from exploitation and destruction to regeneration and building of nature. An example I give here to kind of illustrate how important nature is to us is the great whales. Now, yeah, put aside the fact that it's wrong to kill the biggest animals that have ever been on this planet. Let's put aside that moral standard here. Animals, well, all organisms have a function in the environment. They do something. What the great whales do, it now seems, is they are the engine of nutrient cycling in the oceans. There's only about 1% of the population that there should be, that there were 200 years ago, in the ocean at the moment. And what we're finding is that these actually do something in the environment. What they do, you didn't know it was all going to be about whale poo, did you? What these do is they actually eat low down in the sea, they come to the surface somewhere else and defecate. And where they do that, it's in areas which are low in nutrients. So what that does is it supercharges the growth of algae. By supercharging the growth of algae, that feeds directly into the ecosystem and fires the whole ecosystem. In the process, of course, by doing that, the algae, of course, are photosynthesizing. They're taking carbon from the atmosphere, and as they die, it seeps down to the bottom of the ocean. So they're a carbon pump and a nutrient cycling engine. Now, if that's all going on, that fires the whole ecosystem. These have a huge function in terms of the way the world works. And that's just one example. So wildlife, yes, it's nice to see and everything, but actually it's fundamentally important to the way our life support systems work. And so thinking about our change of attitude, I was given the example of NEP wildland. Now I guess a lot of you have been to NEP and know the concept of rewilding. But the concept of rewilding is changing. It's changing from the idea of this was the farm 30 years ago, monoculture, but the point here was effectively exploiting an asset in order to improve your bottom line and get a profit. Okay? It was done sympathetically. It was always quite a nice farm, but it was failing. The reason they changed method was because actually that didn't work. So they've now changed to a completely different whole culture, not just rewilding, but the whole attitude is different. Rebuild, regenerate nature, and actually then good things happen. Well, we know the good things that happen when it comes to wildlife, but what they've also found is that they've done far, far better when it comes to economically as well. They were suffering bigger and bigger debts every year, but now they've got more money than they've ever had before, and more people employed.
Can I ask something? I haven't, unfortunately, been to NEP.
Oh, you have to go.
I've always got in too late and they've always been booked up and whatever.
Yeah.
But you say that they've been economically more viable now, but isn't that because they've got the tourist industry? Where are they generating their wealth?
Well, very briefly, they get their wealth from all sorts of things. Their proportion of grant that they get from government is far lower than any other farm. Yes, they do have the tourist industry. They also rent out their business, their properties, for example. The tourist industry is a big thing, but they still produce meat. And the meat is very high quality, so they get a very high markup. So all sorts of things come together. And other rewilding projects are finding the same thing.
But we don't talk about the methane.
We do. Yes.
Not that I'm a meat eater.
Oh,
so,
right,
I'm just,
yeah. So it's a whole new culture, and we all know what actually happens when you leave an area of wildlife to regenerate itself. But rewilding is only one approach. But moving from the idea of exploitation to regeneration, to rebuilding, to restoring, is actually where we are now. Rather than exploiting an asset and taking a profit, putting good things in place and allowing good things to happen is, I think, where we're going to go. And good things do happen. This is, again, the NEP example. Loads of new species are appearing there, not just colonisers, but actually things that are uncommon and notable. And it's becoming a hotspot for all sorts of rare and notable species, cuckoos, purple emperors. If you haven't been there, it's completely compulsory. You've got to go there. Okay, right, let's move on. Right, okay, and it's not just NEP. This is happening all over the country now. Rewilding Britain, you must visit their website. There's a really, really good website. You can see what's going on around the country. There are more dots on the map now than this. This is a couple of days ago, but I know of a couple that have come up since. So the whole idea of rewilding is building, but it's the concept behind rewilding that I think is important. Moving from taking to actually rebuilding. And there are other ways of doing it. So regeneration, rebuilding nature, rewilding, all those sorts of things. Right, and it's not just on land either. A lot of you probably know about the kelp restoration project, which we've done off the coast of Sussex, where simply by limiting damaging activities, we're starting to see nature rebuild itself. And that's the point. Nature can rebuild itself given the opportunity. And you get all the other stuff along with it. Okay, you can look at our trust reserves and think, oh God, they're tiny. Less than 1% of the county is a wildlife trust reserve. They punch above their weight. We've got some of the best habitats that you're likely to come across in Sussex, so that they are fantastic. And we know that there's a vast number of species, so again, it's disproportionate the amount we're conserving by looking after these tiny areas. And from the surveys that have been done, we've got over 10,000 species have been recorded on our wildlife trust reserves. But you can still think of them as, well, it's a little bit isolated, and sometimes we think about our own work as being isolated. But actually, I want to give an example to show how it's not about individual dots on the map. It's about how these interlink as well. Ebon Common, some of you are with me at Ebon Common, fantastic site. You could say, well, the Barbastell bat lives there, so if you look after Ebon Common there, then the Barbastell bat will be fine. Yes and no. That's not how it works. The Barbastell bat flies all over the landscape in that area. It roosts and has its babies in Ebon Common. If that landscape wasn't in good condition, you wouldn't have any bats. So it's an example of how a site may be important. It has to be there, but actually it's the quality of the whole landscape which actually determines whether these things can exist or not. So it's the work we do around our nature reserves with all the landowners in that area which is at least as important as the nature reserves themselves. The bats are a very good example, very well worked example, but this is probably an example of something which is completely ubiquitous, probably happens all the time. We need to make sure that the landscape is in good condition. We need to talk about ecological networks, and these days we're talking about nature recovery networks, which brings us back to, I think we mentioned earlier, the Wild Horsham project, where in Horsham alone we're thinking about, well, what does that mean? Project with Horsham, here's Horsham District, these are the nice bits. Good, I mean that's all the sites of special scientific interest, there's NEP in the middle there, but they're a bit isolated. They're not so isolated when you start to talk about a nature recovery network. So you may be in some of the bits that are between the good bits, but you could see your garden, your land, your property as a stepping stone between these nice bits. Maybe part of a corridor, maybe some part of interlinking. So these things start to link up when it comes to thinking about, well, how do you go from global to local? If you're thinking about the local, what can we do? A cure for eco-anxiety is to do something. Everything starts with somebody doing something in some place. Everywhere is local to somebody. So we need to think about our local spot, what we're doing locally. And, well, you've heard the examples already today, haven't you? There's a mass that's actually going on from your local group. You know, there's gardens and pollinators, there's, wildflower meadows, work on trees, the churchyard project, everybody loves a hedgehog, roadside verges, how we can manage them better, how we can address invasive species like Himalayan balsam. And I want to finish on one thing, buildings and wildlife. We're starting to think about a project on swifts. And I'll think about interconnectivity as well here. So swifts, you can do a project here to improve the area for swifts, maybe with swift boxes and so on. Thinking of interconnectivity though, you have to think, well, what's connectivity for? What's the organism you're trying to connect? If you think about a swift, we're interconnected with South Africa. The same with house martins and swallows. Interconnectivity works on a continental scale. So we're connected with South Africa and everywhere in between. So we therefore have connectivity with that area. But connectivity works in other ways as well. Swifts and other birds like that are, at the moment, they're having some trouble because of actually, I think, a big block to them, which is getting worse, is actually crossing the sub-Saharan areas, the Sahara and sub-Saharan areas. Getting across that is a difficulty for them. And following the insects, which are getting rarer because of the way the area is being affected, largely in Africa. And why is Africa suffering? Why is Africa changing? It's largely because of climate change. Africa is actually suffering some of the worst effects of climate change, and yet they're the least responsible for it. They produce 4% of the global emissions, and it's a vast continent with huge numbers of people. We alone in this country, I think we produce 1 or 2%. So the swifts are suffering, or could be suffering, because that crossing of the Sahara is getting more and more difficult. It's getting more and more difficult because of climate change. climate change is getting worse and worse because of us. So it comes back to interconnectivity, not just in terms of connectivity of habitats, but connectivity of our lifestyles with what's actually happening in the natural world. So I just thought that was a nice example just to finish on, to talk about, well, how things are actually all connected, and it comes back to somebody doing something in some place in order to make some contribution as a cure for eco-anxiety, but also it's fun, you get stuff done, isn't it? Okay, I think I'll leave it on that and pass over to James. Thank you very much. So it's global to local, but it's also local to global.
So now I'm just going to show you some pretty pictures, basically. It's going to be very light, very easy going. So welcome to Woods Mill. Has anybody not been to Woods Mill before? Oh, okay, well, quite a few. Oh, welcome. Well, hopefully we'll have a nice day. Hopefully it won't start raining as well, so that sounds very promising. So I'm going to give you a very brief history of Woods Mill, folks. Obviously we can't be here all day, so I'm going to have to be pretty brief on the history. And then we'll have a little look at what's kind of around on the reserve at the moment. So Woods Mill, well actually Sussex Wildlife Trust was formed in 1961. And it's one of 47 wildlife trusts across the UK, and we manage about 32 nature reserves across the county. I think it's 32, Tony. We really should count them one day. Let's say it's somewhere between 31 and 33. That's 32, isn't it? 32. So 4,500 acres in total. Woods Mill was about 48 acres, so it's a relatively small reserve. There was a time when we didn't own any nature reserves though, folks. So I'm just going to take you back a little bit. We'll have to go back a little bit further than this clock though, because if we follow the clock, we'll only be going back about 12 hours, and that won't be long enough. That won't be long enough. So back in the day, so Woods Mill is located in the centre of Sussex. There's been a water mill on the site for centuries, for a long time, and it's been run by many generations of Sussex millers, including this gentleman here, Caleb Coo, until 1927. Quite an imposing looking gentleman, I'm sure you'll agree. He sort of looks like he could have come straight out of a horror film, doesn't he? Yeah, he's it's quite a look, that one. So essentially, so when the mill stopped running, then Woods Mill went through a lot of different ownerships. A lake was added, lots of non-native trees were planted, particularly in the area around the buildings. Shouldn't have put white text, I can't see the white text. Never mind. So in 1946, Woods Mill was eventually purchased by a gentleman named Mr. Chavas. And at this time, it was a lovely sort of tea room, and obviously it exists on a very busy road as well. So it would have been a very nice location for people to stop and enjoy the surroundings. Now, at one point later, Mr. Smith and his family actually came down here. They were enjoying a nice piece of cake and a cup of tea, and he said to Mr. Chavas, "Wow, what a lovely place you have here. I would love to live somewhere like this." And Mr. Chavas said, "Well, I'm selling it actually, you can buy it if you want." So Mr. Smith said, "Okay, I'll buy it." And that was it, simple as that. That was how deals were done back in the day. So it was then owned by the Smith family. And in 1966, the Smith family very generously donated Woods Mill to Sussex Wildlife Trust, or back in the day then it would have been called Sussex Naturalist Trust, and then it became the Sussex Trust for Nature Conservation, and then it became Sussex Wildlife Trust. And it's a miracle that I've remembered all of that, to be honest with you, because it was long before my time, folks, long before my time. And I think actually to this day, probably the Smith grandchildren and great-grandchildren are probably a little bit sad that Mr. Smith actually donated Woods Mill to Sussex Wildlife Trust, because otherwise this would have been their back garden. But never mind, better for us. So essentially all of the old buildings on site have now become our headquarters. So we have around about 100 staff that I was going to say are permanently located here. Post-COVID, that's probably not so much the case. A lot of people obviously are located in different parts around the county now. The land was, of course, turned into a nature reserve. And on June the 8th, 1968, Woods Mill was finally open to the public. And one of the gentlemen who turned up on this day was this gentleman just here. Oh, I realised I've got a funky light. Does it work? Oh, it's very hard to aim. Is it there? No, it doesn't really work very well on a TV. Can you see that? Yeah. Oh, there we go. Good stuff. So that gentleman is, of course, James Fisher, a prominent broadcaster and naturalist. And he said we're obviously at the beginning of great things in Sussex. And he was absolutely right. So for many years, Woods Mill has been a fantastic place for wildlife. Unfortunately, Tony did touch on the catastrophic decline of the turtle dove, but it has traditionally always been a good site for turtle dove, the purple emperor, obviously badgers and fly agaric there as well. It's also been a wonderful place for people over the years. So Woods Mill has played a very important role in teaching children and adults about wildlife and conservation. Thousands of school children visit every year. Which may explain the condition of our bluebell woodland, but we'll leave that. It's also very important for training new volunteers in wildlife surveying and practical conservation. So here we've got people learning how to survey butterflies and some hedge planting, some blackthorn hedge planting today. So we'll be testing you all out on the butterflies on the reserve, of course. Now that you've done this quiz that I've heard about, you'll be experts, I'm sure. Some great wildlife at Woods Mill. I'm not suggesting we'll definitely spot a tawny owl today, but nonetheless, of course, we have traditionally had nightingale on site. That's a topic maybe I'll talk about when we get out onto the reserve. Of course, it is a bird that is in serious decline in much the same way as turtle dove. It's a good site for roe deer as well. And then lots of other species, tree creeper, song thrush, wasp spider, lots of different dragonfly species. Very good site for dragonfly and damselfly, barn owls as well. Now, back in 2018, as part of the 50 Years of Woods Mill project that I was originally employed for, we actually had a bit of funding that allowed us to install a camera in the kestrel nest box. Now, I don't know if any of you had the chance to see this, but it really was very exciting. So it went live in April 18. So here are the fairly fresh chicks here, not too old. And it's absolutely brilliant. Thousands of people were watching these chicks as they went through their growing stages. As you can see, they're real posers, aren't they? Real posers. And of course, this kestrel pair actually were fantastic at catching rats. They found a great supply of brown rats, and as you can see, a brown rat in comparison to a kestrel is actually quite a sizable thing. So of course, feeding on these rats, they did exceptionally well. It's like a group of boisterous teenagers, isn't it? It really is. Absolutely fantastic. So you might be able to see here, folks, we actually had 6 kestrels in the box that year. And it was a very successful brood, actually, because they all brooded successfully, which was fantastic. So it was very addictive for people all around the world. And actually, we did a little graph just to see, because there was a very strange drop-off in staff productivity, and we weren't really sure why this was for a while. But it did seem to chime in. There's a bit of an explanation for that there. And people send us fantastic messages from all around the world. They absolutely loved watching it. But to be honest with you, it wasn't just people, because actually there were some other fairly addictive viewers. This one was particularly keen, couldn't quite understand why I couldn't get access to the nest box, but nonetheless. So moving on from that, as Tony said, very keen to get out in the reserve and show you some of the wildlife on the reserve. So I don't want to concentrate too long on this. But what sort of things might we see today? Well, there's a lot of invertebrates out on the reserve. Fortunately, we've timed it very well. Now it's quite a sunny period. We've launched into spring properly, haven't we? So there should be a lot of bees out in the reserve, one of which might be the buff-tailed bumblebee with this buffy area just around the edge of the abdomen here. Only really kind of visible on the queens, not so much on the sort of workers and the drones. So there'll be other bumblebee species. Bumblebees only comprise about 10% of all of the UK's bee species. You might see hoverflies, lots of hoverflies about now. This one is the marmalade hoverfly, and of course it was attracted by a marmalade sandwich. Inevitable, bound to happen. Very common species you might find in your garden, Episurfus balteatus, this one. Lots of drone flies around, like Eristales tenax, so you'll see lots of these. You might even confuse them for honeybee drones. Their flight actually is similar to honeybees, which obviously serves a very useful kind of evolutionary trait to stop them from perhaps being predated quite so much. You might see this little one as well. Have you all seen one of these? Yeah, so the bee fly is a great thing, and you're probably thinking, well, that's a savage sting there, isn't it? It's a savage sting, but it actually, they're completely harmless.
Is it a bee or is it a fly?
It's a fly. Yeah, it's a fly.
It's a
fly because it doesn't have the segmented body. So this belongs to the order Diptera. So it's a true fly. And actually they're a parasite. So what they do is they essentially carpet bomb a bee nest, and they sort of fling all their eggs into a solitary bee nest, and then the larva will hatch and crawl down into the bee nest and predate all the bee larvae. So yeah, they're a nest parasite, but they're very furry, they're very fluffy. So if we were to sort of anthropomorphise a fly, you might say this is one of the cutest flies. Maybe, I don't know, perhaps. What a funky looking thing. So the right sort of time of year to start seeing the first of the bush crickets, dark bush cricket in this case, and we'd be looking in the sort of along the shrub line, along the hedgerows. And if you look very carefully in some of the composites, you might even be lucky enough to see something like a crab spider, fantastically well camouflaged, and obviously they will predate flying insects that land on the flowers, bees and flies, etc. Now what about butterflies? Because actually you might have seen quite a lot of butterflies that overwinter. So on the reserve you might see peacock, you might see red admiral, you might see small tortoiseshell, you might see comma, you might see brimstone. And actually we had a gentleman who phoned in And he said, I've just seen a peacock on the reserve. And of course, we looked at each other and we thought, well, you know, we see peacocks on the reserve all the time. Can't believe this guy. Can't believe he's phoned up. And it turned out actually it was a peacock. There was actually, there was actually a peacock on the reserve, which was a little bit different. So that was a surprise. And this peacock actually was sat in a tree. So you know, you don't often see a peacock sat in a tree. So it was unusual. It wasn't.
That's what, yeah.
Oh, well, okay. Well, not at Woods Mill, you don't. No, I mean at Woods Mill.
Oh, I was
Sorry. I should have stipulated. You don't see a peacock at Woods Mill sat in a tree. Very unusual. So that's the only time that's happened, as far as I'm aware. So the peacock is, of course, actually a beautiful butterfly. And if you were to flip a peacock the other way round, sorry, I should have done a slide for that, really. If you were to flip it the other way round, then these eye spots and the abdomen, they kind of have the look of a face. And peacocks often employ this shock tactic where they open the wings very quickly, you know, in the event of predators turning up. And it might just be enough to scare off a sort of rodent or a bird that's looking to feed on it. You never know, never know. And you know, actually, I was just going to say, folks, if the peacock was a rare butterfly, I think people would travel a long way to see it, because it's very spectacular, isn't it? I mean, it's absolutely incredible looking thing. So, of course, a red admiral, lots of red admirals on site as well. Should see some brimstones today, providing the sun stays out. Very pretty butterfly, sorry. And of course, even the word butterfly may well derive from the buttery colour of the male brimstone. Comma. Now, you might be thinking, well, why is the comma named? You know, is it named because of these sort of comma-shaped scallops on the upper wing? But it's actually named because of this little comma on the hind wing. Very distinctive. And of course, this camouflage is super cryptic as well. So, you know, when these things are in the canopy and, you know, perched within the hedges, are actually very, very hard to see sometimes. Hopefully you might see a small copper out in the meadow, perhaps speckled wood in the woodlands. You should see some of this flower around on site as well. This is cuckoo flower, or lady smock, and it's one of the food plants for the orange tip butterfly. So it's just the male orange tips that have the orange tips. Very pretty. Fingers crossed we'll see some orange tips today as well. This is the egg of the orange tip butterfly as well. So, actually, this was already touched on in Viv's presentation in terms of the brown hair streaks. Another miserable looking day. Fortunately, it looks a little bit nicer out there today. So, of course, the last few months have been a good time to look for brown hair streak eggs. Now they're actually just about on the change point into caterpillars. So, actually, it wouldn't be a very good time to look for eggs now. Hence why Michael took you all out in January. So, I'm sure as some of you remember, the eggs are very tiny, just the size of a full stop. So, if you have kids or grandkids, you know, get them to look. Because basically their backs are better and their knees are better, so it's better for them. And of course they will turn into a beautiful adult brown hair streak. Now these are butterflies actually that are reliant on having master ash, like a master ash tree, to basically carry out all their you know, their territorial sort of displays and their mating. And of course, when you consider what's happening to ash, you know, through dieback in the UK countryside, you know, this is already a species that has suffered extensively through intensification of agriculture. And obviously the loss of a lot of our ash is not really going to assist them. Okay, so just moving on to damselflies and dragonflies very quickly. So for any of you who like a dragonfly, or a damselfly in this case, you might be thinking, God, those blues, they're tricky, aren't they? They're really tricky because they're all very similar. So you've got blue-tailed damselfly, you've got common blue damselfly, you've got azure damselfly. Tough, right? I'm going to give you all a little mini test. I'm going to tell you now. So with azure damselfly, so you have to look at the antihumeral stripes on the thorax. And in the azure damselfly, the blue antihumeral stripe is narrower than the black stripe above it. On the common blue damselfly, the blue antihumeral stripe is thicker than the black stripe. Okay? But also, there's another key clue. So the azure damselfly has a little spur on the thorax, and this is called the coenagrian spur, which the common blue damselfly doesn't have. So which one is this?
Pass.
Blue one.
Pass.
Anybody? Okay, common blue damselfly. And this one has the little spur on the thorax, so it makes it hey, excellent. So you can ID them all out in the reserve now. Perfect. Great stuff. So from the end of May, we should start seeing the emperor dragonfly, which is the UK's largest species. Some of the female golden ring dragonflies sometimes are a little bit bigger. Very big, very territorial. And as long as the sun stays out, which I think it isn't, we might see a beautiful demoiselle, which really does live up to its name. It's a stunning dragonfly. This one actually is a young male, but they are the only damselflies in the UK, basically, that have coloured wings. There's only 2 species in the genus Calopteryx. Beautiful demoiselle and banded demoiselle. Very pretty. They're like little iridescent jewels. Really are stunning. Okay, so that'll be enough insects at the moment. There are obviously lots of other insects out in the reserve, but clearly I can't put them all in a presentation. So of course we have a lot of resident bird species. Now I put these 2 in the presentation because it's singing for us right now. So, you know, I psychically imparted this into the presentation because I knew it would be singing. So, of course, there are lots of blackbirds, and I thought I'm not going to play the song too long because obviously it might, you know, disrupt this one. There we go. And of course, the blackbird has beautiful sort of fruiting melodic song. I don't want to sort of play it to this male blackbird because it's very important not to, not to do this, because of course birds that are busy protecting territories and trying to win a mate, all I'm doing is introducing another male blackbird into the territory, which, you know, he's not going to be too happy about. Now, of course, I'm sure you all noticed that there's been a chaffinch singing for ages outside, right outside the door. That's why I put this one in as well, by the way. Just saying. So chaffinch, essentially, this might be a chaffinch call, actually, or it could be the song. Okay, so this is very distinctive chaffinch call, which is basically like the word finch. Finch, 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 finch. There we go, so that's the call. And the song, you've heard it outside anyway, you don't really need to hear this, to be honest. There we go. So it's got a lovely descending little song, which is basically like, like a fast bowler doing a run-up, or I like to think it's somebody falling down the stairs, actually. It's like... There we go, nice. So hopefully when we're out in the reserve, we might hear a Chetty's warbler, which has a very explosive song, so it'll be very distinctive. It's not a particularly beautiful looking bird. It's relatively plain, but it does have a very, very distinctive song, which goes something like this. So it's like a little explosion. It's something like, listen, who am I? Chetty, Chetty, Chetty. That's it. There you go. Chetty's warbler for you folks. So we'll talk a little bit more about that on the reserve. We probably won't see a water owl. It's a very elusive bird, but I've put it in here really just for the sound effect. So if you haven't heard a water owl, then I suppose the best thing to think would be, imagine what the sound would be like if you strangled a pig. That's pretty much what it will be like. See, I'm right. Am I not right? I absolutely am. It's pig strangling. Pig strangling. Don't strangle a pig, by the way, folks. Okay, disclaimer. There we go. So we also have the little grebes on site as well. And the little grebe has a lovely little tittering call. It has a little laugh, a little giggle. There you go, a little giggle. See, very distinctive bird. I love a little grebe. Great little bird. They have suffered extensively, actually, through mink predation on site, unfortunately. But hopefully they'll be back this year to breed. Might see a buzzard on site. This is one of the raptors we typically see, along with the kestrels. And you might see one of these, actually. Can you all see that? You see that bird?
Little owl. Is it?
Oh, is it well spotted though? You're very quick to spot that. Can you all see that? Yeah, good stuff. So it's there. It is. There it is. I'll go back. See it? Yeah. There we go. Down in the corner. So actually, this is a tawny owl. It's a young tawny owl. Yeah. And the thing is, young tawny owls, they do this thing called branching, where they won't fly, obviously, because it hasn't fully fledged, but they sort of move between the branches. And the great thing is, they think they're invisible. So they sit there, and you can be really close to them, and they sort of open their eyes a little bit. And they think, well, it's all right, it can't see me. It's fine, I won't move. So you can just sit there next to a tawny owl, have a great view. Fantastic. So I had this view. It's very nice. Yeah, it was very nice. Fantastic. Okay, of course, you can't miss these on the site. I mean, they're not actually like this at the moment. This was from another year that I photographed. They haven't been born yet. So I've jumped the gun, or the egg in this case.
Good photo.
Thank you very much. That one's not mine, but obviously the last one is better, of course. So the swans, they've been busy causing carnage at Woods Mill for many years. So they turn up, basically nest on the path, attack everybody, try and get into Woods Mill, and poo everywhere. So that's pretty much the lie of the land for the swans. There we go. They are here, yes, they are here. And actually they've nested on the lake this year. So they're in a very sensible position. So your shoes will remain clean, which is great news. And nobody will, have an arm broken, which is a myth, by the way. I'm only kidding. Right, okay. So, of course, we do also have a lot of migrant birds. And I'm not going to do a whole talk on migration. It's going to be very, very brief. But suffice to say, we get a lot of birds typically coming from sub-Saharan Africa. Not always the case, depending on the species. And of course, as we discussed very briefly, there's actually, it's a very transient thing. Migration is a very transient process. It's changing radically all the time, and birds, of course, are adapting. Of course, we were talking about those swallows that are now staying, and actually we have other birds that, are also doing this. They're examples. So some of you might be thinking, well, why are a lot of these birds even leaving sub-Saharan Africa? Why not just stay there? Because, insect food is plentiful all year round. It's such a great place to be. But most of the reasoning comes from the fact that there's a huge amount of pressure on those resources because of the sheer volume of species that sort of remain there. Part of that means that predation levels are a lot higher as well, and also there's much higher kind of potential risk of disease. So there are a lot of reasons to move on. So if you go slightly further north, you know, the winters remain relatively mild. There's still a reasonable quantity of food through winter, so it's a pretty good place to be. So lots of birds do choose to overwinter, you know, kind of surrounding the Mediterranean region and north of the Sahara. You know, if you come up to the region where we are, of course the winters are quite cold. Insect numbers are not that great really apart from around the coast, but of course it's a good place to breed because insects are very plentiful through the breeding season. And if you go further north into the Arctic regions, then of course you get these really long days, so you just have a fantastic opportunity to feed, you know, almost sort of 24 hours a day. Pardon me. So some of the birds that you might see here, so chiffchaff will definitely hear this bird on the reserve, that's for sure, announcing its own name. I haven't put the sound effects in, folks, because otherwise it's going to be a lot of warblers to take on board, and we'll talk about them when we're out in the reserve anyway. So chiffchaff is a bit complex because actually we do have a lot of overwintering chiffchaffs now, but it's probably not our breeding birds. So they're actually probably birds that are reverse migrating from Scandinavia and choosing to stay here over winter because it's slightly milder. Bit of a complex story. Kind of the same thing is going on with blackcap as well, but most of those birds reverse migrate from Eastern Europe and Germany. So you might see its very similar looking cousin, the willow warbler. Look, they're very different, aren't they?
No.
Yeah? See, easy to see the differences, isn't it, folks? Yeah, you can't really see the differences here, actually. One of the key differences, chiffchaffs do have darker legs, but you have to be careful with the light, and actually the length of the wing. So this section here of the wing, I'll try and point at it. Oh god, it's pointed there, I don't know. No. Anyway, so this section here, these are the primary wing feathers. So these are the feathers right at the end of the wing, and this is known as the primary projection. So basically, this section on the chiffchaff, the primary projection, is about the same length as the tertials, there or thereabouts. But on the willow warbler, which you can't see from this photo, the primary projection is a lot longer. I cut that out just to be particularly frustrating. No, I didn't, I'm kidding. And actually, it's because the willow warblers migrate a lot further as well. So they're more competent flyers because of the length of the wings. So lots of the willow warblers will go from sub-Saharan Africa all the way to Siberia, big journey. Most of the chiffchaffs tend to overwinter around the Mediterranean, or you get the ones that kind of reverse migrate here over winter. So it's a slightly dumpier looking bird. Their songs are very different. That's the best way to ID them. So reed warbler, we should pick up some reed warbler on site today. Hopefully we'll get a view if we're a bit patient. We'll definitely hear them singing. We'll also definitely hear these singing, the common whitethroat. You won't miss this bird. If you're not familiar with the common whitethroat, you soon will be. And it's a very similar looking cousin, the lesser whitethroat. If you're not familiar with the lesser whitethroat, you won't be much more familiar today because we won't see one, but we probably will hear one. If you're lucky, you might see some swallows. Hopefully you've all seen some swallows today. Not necessarily today, but hopefully you've all seen some swallows this year. Yeah? No? Oh, okay, a few notes. So, of course, they are back. They've been back for a little while, and some of them haven't even left. Not necessarily we'll see a hobby today, but the hobby is a fantastic bird that arrives here usually in sort of April, May time. It is a sort of specialist hunter of swallows and martins, particularly later in the year, but throughout the breeding season it largely concentrates on hunting dragonflies. It's just a superb aerial acrobat. It's one of my favourite birds of prey. It is absolutely phenomenal thing. Looks like a giant swift when it's flying. You know, if you see a hobby hunting, you'll be gobsmacked. It's just an incredible thing. So sometimes we have spotted flycatcher passing through here. Always a nice bird to see. Quite a plain looking bird, but you know, significant declines like a lot of our migrant birds in recent years, unfortunately. And perhaps even a pied flycatcher. So pied flycatcher doesn't breed here on the reserve. They breed in westerly parts of the UK. This is just a juvenile. The males are a very resplendent black and white bird, really, really pretty. But it's amazing what will pass through Woodsmill, even if we're not that aware of it. So actually the only reason we found this pied flycatcher, you might be thinking, why is this person holding a pied flycatcher? How has this happened? Well, actually this was a ringing event. So we had a ringing event actually, and it was caught in a mist net. So yeah, whereas generally they would go completely unnoticed. They just pass through, keep a low profile, you know, you wouldn't even know it was there. So we had International Dawn Chorus Day not so long ago, and of course one of the prime birds to hear is this plain little fella here. Everybody know what it is? Yeah, of course, a nightingale, absolutely. So let's just play you a little bit of nightingale song. Oh, it's my photo, that last one. Very nice, thank you. Let's have a little play. So nightingale song, of course, is very, very dramatic. This should attract any, hopefully, in the local area. Okay. There you go, folks. So the kind of virtuoso performance. Beautiful bird song.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, see, it's contentious, isn't it? It's contentious. Yeah, it's very
Keats thought it was.
well, it's very subjective, isn't it?
No, you don't think it is?
I think it's technically amazing, incredible. Is it beautiful? I don't know. Yeah,
I think the blackbird's probably one of the most beautiful.
yeah. The blackbird's very melodic. So the blackbirds sing, in a pitch and tone that's very pleasing to the human ear. So generally, people find blackbird a more pleasing bird to listen to.
What do you find the most beautiful then?
Oh, well, it's subjective, isn't it?
I know it's subjective, but
Yeah. Well, I think the blackbirds. I prefer the singing of the blackbird. Yeah. I think it's a nicer song to listen to. But I suppose owing to the, the declines in nightingale population, it feels still a very special experience hearing one. Whether you, however you feel about the song itself. Yeah. But they've got huge variety. That's the thing. So, and it's very dramatic. Every part of the song, nightingale song, is very dramatic. So turtle dove as well, of course. I won't really touch too much on turtle dove because Tony covered that quite extensively. But just to listen to the purring call. So I'm sure some of you will remember this extensively from years ago. So one has been heard purring on the reserve. Yeah? Oh, did you hear it?
Yeah, we almost sure certainly did.
Ah, fantastic. Good stuff. Excellent. Well, that's good to hear. So there's a possibility today, and it's an interesting song because it doesn't really seem to matter how close to it you are. It carries really, really well. And it doesn't change in volume too much even when you're nearby. So often you can hear it from the other side of the reserve. It's quite surprising. So just a few quick slides, folks. Anybody who's snake phobic, close your eyes. That all looks okay. So if you're very lucky, you might see one of these. Great photo there. Not mine, unfortunately. So we do have grass snake on reserve because it is quite a wet reserve. Grass snakes are very aquatic. They do a lot of their hunting in water. Beautiful looking thing, and of course our largest snake species as well. Actually significantly bigger than most adders. So a grass snake actually can reach 1.2 meters, perhaps even more. But completely harmless, folks. So, and nobody's died of an adder bite since like 1970 anyway. So common lizard on site as well. Okay, we probably need it to be a bit sunnier, but we will look on some of the log paths today for common lizard. And then of course we do have slow worms on site as well, and a legless lizard. And and of course it is bluebell season at the moment, folks. So we're kind of a little bit late now, but we'll have a little peek in the woodland just to see the bluebells. They're still doing quite nicely, looking stunning and resplendent, mixed in with lots of greater stitchwort at the moment as well. But we're probably more excited at all the yellow rattle coming through in the meadow, which of course is going to have huge benefits for all the wildflowers in the unimproved grassland, and will benefit all the butterflies and other insects. So that's an exciting thing to see. We're a bit early to see it sort of flowering today, but we'll certainly be able to see the leaves pretty much all over Mill Ditch Field. And that, folks, is pretty much it. So the Kestrels, thank you for listening as well. And thanks very much. There's a little... No problem at all, pleasure. That's it. That's good timing, isn't it? I think we've done very well.